Welcome to the OLM GitHub Triage meeting. Today is Thursday, February 18th. We are going to look at outstanding GitHub issues that users in the community want to bring up and maybe get some support with. On the agenda today, I see that we have one issue by Chris, 1547. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And then we can start taking a look at that issue. Chris, do you want to talk about that issue that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, so this is a slightly older one. This is where we would really like the operator, we would like OLM to be able to install either a pod security policy or a security context constraint for the operator to bind to, rather than having to rely on a permission for just creating a permission for a pre-existing pod security policy or a security context constraint. So I know that manifests are supported for config maps and secrets, and there have been incrementally more of these being added, but PSPs and SCCs are not one of them. And I know PSPs are kind of deprecated. At least I've seen that announced where they're thinking of getting rid of that in favor of something like OPA. But I still think at least security context constraints in OpenShift terms would still be viable. Does it make sense?
Right. Yes. So the ask is to add these additional items allow them to be added to the bundle.
Correct.
Okay. So yeah. So we did add. I don't think we added.
Yeah, Alex actually posted in here saying, "Hey, we added this already," and then he came back and said, "Oh, well, we didn't add that one." So
we added. We added some items. I wonder where this is in the documentation. Sorry, let me find it. We added support for things like priority classes and pod. I guess it wasn't pod security policies. It was
I can never find that doc when I need it either.
Was PDBs.
PDBs, yeah, pod disruption budgets. Okay, yeah. Right, and so the ask is to expand that to pod security policies and security context. So I think that the ask totally makes sense. I think from having a pod bring its own pod security policies or SCCs is also a bit. It may conflict with the existing ones, at least on OpenShift, where it comes with default SCCs, and it's very opinionated about what pods can and can't do.
Well, the only one that the OpenShift really enforces is the restricted one, right? So that's the default one used by everybody. All the other ones are used by OpenShift componentry for its things, right? And we don't really recommend that any of our customers use those if they can get by with it because they're too coarse. So we really, really want our customers, our products, to be able to create their own security policies that are very tailored to the minimum of what they need. That way it's very clear to the customer on what my security posture is for my operator.
Right. So Daniel, I see you're on the call. How do you feel about something like this?
We had always the desire to support essentially any Kubernetes manifest as part of an operator bundle, but treat some of them special and require some of them even. So I think we already have planned to provide the ability for bundles to contain any standard Kubernetes manifest, and we would require some of them to be present in the first place. So like a deployment, for instance, or some RBAC, which we then interpret in a special way, whereas the other stuff we are just applying, right? Because we can't foresee all the needs that operator authors may have for shipping stuff with the operator. We used to have a pretty strong opinion on what an operator should be consisting of, but the list is never ending, right? And there are use cases for this kind of thing. So PSP, SCC, this might be something that is totally viable, for instance, outside of a production cluster, where you want to be careful and just applying those things as part of an operator install. But in general, I feel we should be able to support anything in Kubernetes to make up an operator. So I don't think we should try to add special treatment for known resources, because that's a never-ending exercise. We may decide to end up doing this for this particular request if there's really a pressing need behind this.
Yeah, this one does need a little special handling, because the cluster permissions would have to be written to use that, right? So because you have to use the thing that you create. So we might have to create a special cluster permission that automatically recognizes that this is a PSP and creates the RBAC rule for it. Otherwise, you need to know what the name is ahead of time.
Yeah, true. Yeah. So yeah, for this kind of stuff, we probably need some special treatment done as well. I mean, I know this has been discussed in the past as being fairly concerning in regards to security, because it's not kind of expected that an operator just ships with an SCC that is making your cluster unsafe. There's no way for us to easily highlight that to a user, right? Other than the generic install plan controls that we have today. So I think we need to have special discussion around this particular thing. But eventually we want to support arbitrary manifests, right? But yeah, this one seems like a candidate where we need to have specific coverage in OLM to process this correctly.
I mean, alternatively, do you know if there's any work happening with OPA in this regard that might help here?
Unfortunately, I don't.
Okay.
I think we want to get to a place, Daniel, where there's no special handling for anything, and things are pluggable. I don't know much about CCs and PSPs, so I'm gonna bite my tongue here. But my initial thought would be that we wouldn't need any special handling for that either.
So the unique part of this is that those things are resources that you have to grant your pod access to through cluster role binding.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means the cluster permissions would either have to be injected. You'd have to recognize the fact that you're creating this SCC and inject that into the cluster role binding, or the role binding, or you'd have to make sure that the name doesn't get mutated from the resource, so they can actually put that permission inside the CSV. Because I'm assuming permissions are something you would still want to formalize rather than just having them drop in a role binding object inside their manifests. Or is that?
Why not?
Well, I'm asking. Yeah, is that something you're looking at too?
Yes.
So that would be the role binding for the operator, not the operands.
OLM is always about operators. So whatever you need for your operand, your operator should be generating and creating.
Yep. Okay. All right. I'm just wondering about the okay, I got noodle on that a little bit more, but so I think if you decide to go all in on manifests and not express permissions through the CSV, and instead through roles and role bindings manifests, then it totally makes sense. You could have your PSP or your SCCs bound at that same level, right? Because then it's kind of apples and apples.
Yeah, I think that's the general direction. You could already drop roles and role bindings in the bundle. It gets the interaction that the install plan has with the operator group. I'll have to check again, but I believe it's still locked down by the permissions there for anything that's not a CRD and API service. I think a webhook. So you can still restrict what you can apply given an install, even if it's not on the CSV and just in the bundle today. Does that make sense?
So I think, make sure I understand. So are you saying that I no longer need to put permissions in my CSV and I can just express them as cluster roles, and role bindings?
So you can do that. There are still some things that you get from putting it in the CSV itself. One of them is the ability for the CSV to detect missing requirements. So like your CSV will kick in depending if there is a role or role binding it's missing. That won't happen if it is something that's been included with the bundle and applied today.
Okay. So I guess what are you recommending here? Are you recommending that we move forward with SCC and PSP work, and then with the caveat you'd probably have to express your permissions at that same level?
I don't want to end up eating my words later, so I'm going to have to research SECs and PSPs more to be able to say whether we really can just drop roles and role bindings and have everything work the way you expect it. But it would be my inclination is to open it up to roles. Those new resources in the short term, because in the long term we're going for everything, like arbitrary manifests. That being said, I do know that we did look into enabling arbitrary manifests in the short term before, and there was some contention in the team, I think, about arbitrary transitioning, pivoting between like resources. I think Kevin, do you remember any of this conversation, Kevin?
So I think that there are potentially some other issues with where we're at right now, just in terms of like exactly what you said. Like there are certain features that OLM is providing that if we just said, oh, hey, let's open it up for any arbitrary manifests, go drop your deployment here, don't worry about defining it in the CSV, you're not going to really get the same experience. So if we are to go and do something like this, there's a lot of sort of the fundamental building blocks that OLM provides you right now that we would need to build up before we could just sort of support this out of the box, right? Like we could just go and say, hey, stop looking at what manifests are in the bundle, apply whatever's in there. But it's not going to play nice with a lot of the features OLM has.
Yeah, I think the main thing again is the status reporting. So like you could be in a situation where like the SEC gets deleted, and since OLM as of today doesn't keep things applied by install plans alive on the cluster at steady state, your CSV, since it's not a first class component of it, it would not pick up the fact that it's not there, and it would be happily chugging along saying, hey, everything is good, until your operator explodes if it can't operate without that SEC.
Okay, so I guess Could you, I guess, put that on your list maybe for in the next triage meeting? So we could kind of come back and revisit this to see if this is something we want to prioritize. This is a big deal for our customers, and so this is why I'm kind of harping on this one. This comes up every month. We fail to sell something to a customer because they're freaking out about the pod security policies and SECs and how they have way too many elevated permissions and so forth.
I'm trying to understand like why the admins can't apply and configure SCCs directly on the operator deployments and pods themselves after OLM has applied them. Is it something that needs to change like in the pod or something that OLM applies?
I'm trying to recall all the issues. So for sure, when you install an operator with all namespaces, which of course is going to be the new default, today it runs as cluster admin because the default service account, or the service account that is bound to the cluster or to the operator, is running in the OpenShift operators namespace, which has way too many permissions. It's just got a garbage can of permissions. And so therefore they end up getting privileged for a lot of these operators. So that's probably a different problem, but it's one of the problems that they have. So then it becomes, okay, so you can't really solve that because the namespace is poisoned, right? The namespace itself has too many permissions because it's basically granted to everybody in the namespace. Because the PSP or the SCC is actually bound through normal RBAC rules now. It didn't used to be. If they install into their own namespace, then it's better because then you're not inheriting that. Then you do have a lot more control. So I do agree with that. But we're trying to move away from that.
I mean, they can still make an all namespace, or sorry, a global operator group in any namespace they want and install the stuff there instead.
Yeah. That's I think that's one of the really sort of fundamental points is, right, the OpenShift operators namespace is just the default on the UI if you don't pick something else. There's nothing fundamental about that namespace that's special than any other namespace.
But you know that everybody's using the UI to install. It's like the entry point.
I don't disagree, but I guess the thing is, like, there's no technical reason why that should actually be a limitation and why that should prevent anybody from applying specific rules to any of their operators.
They can choose a different namespace during install in the UI, can they not?
Yeah, there's a drop down.
Yeah.
You can just pick whatever.
No,
I know the default is just click, 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 but if you pause, you can pick one.
Only if you do own namespace mode, right? Right. So I'm talking about all namespace mode. All namespace mode, you cannot pick the namespace.
Really?
I was not. Hold on.
All namespace mode, it always goes into OpenShift operators.
That seems crazy to me.
I
like
apologize.
It is.
Most of us don't. Most of us kubectl.
Yeah, I know. Most of my customers use the UI, right? So
maybe this is something.
That seems like something we should just fix.
Was there Daniel? Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I was just coming in that we had consciously made the decision 2 years ago to make it that namespace because at that time the operator group concept was just way too complex to express in the UI, right? So, and we were like at the very beginning of operator adoption and momentum in OpenShift, outside of the cluster operators anyway. So we consciously chose that as a simplification, that all global operators just by default go in the OpenShift operators namespace, which already has the global operator group present, right? So I think if you would have launched with a very complex UI that told you about, hey, there's an install namespace and then there's a watch namespace, and then you kind of select them individually and independently from each other, that would have created a lot of confusion. But here we are 2 years later, many lessons learned. So I think for those kind of special things, we can think about making the UI so that there's an advanced configuration drop-down tab or whatever that lets you specify this, because clearly on the OLM side, the functionality is there.
Okay, so then I think what you're saying is I should open up a feature request against OpenShift to try to express all namespaces mode in a different way. Maybe this is part of the descoped operator work that we'll have to do, right, to make that work better. And then as part of that, we would have to include how do you deal with pod security policies in that mode? Because it would be really nice for the customer to be able to express that, you know, in a very clear workflow rather than having to do all of this scripty stuff ahead of time or post time, right,
Yeah.
to protect themselves after things have already been installed.
Yeah, I think so. I think you touched on a good point in that in the new world where everything is descoped and global, some of these decisions, you know, they become obsolete or are basically replaced by other concepts, right? I think in that sense, we should kind of see if we can holistically adjust the UI to fit better with the global operator pattern in general. And that would also entail other changes, right? Because at that point, we also have control, first-class control over not only where is the operator installed, but also who can actually see the operator, which is independent of what operators, what namespaces can the operator itself see, right? These concepts are today mingled together, and it's kind of very hard to explain to like an admin who starts to work with operators for the first time. So that's why the UI is what it is. But I think we can maybe do something for the UI in between to have an advanced config mode where these kind of things are better controllable. I'm not sure like how we would surface things like PSPs, because that is something where we will need to look inside the operator bundle and see if that's something that's present, right? Or we wait until later, until OLM has actually extracted the bundle and created an install plan and see if it's part of that there, and then kind of drive the UI flow differently. So it's also a little bit of a chicken and egg problem that we kind of don't know what we install until we actually attempt to install it, right? So and that's another kind of, you know, twist in the UI experience today. But I think, yeah, it makes sense to think about surfacing some of the more advanced configuration options to a user who has actually a need for them. Still, I think 90% of the users are just fine with the global OpenShift operators namespace being the default.
None of our users are. So just to be clear, the users that we talk to, my customers, are super anal about security policies. In fact, we lose lots of sales because of just that alone. And so it becomes very tricky, right, to work our way around that.
I mean, on that side, I'm interested to learn more about, and we can take this in another discussion, but the default security context constraints on OpenShift are super restrictive out of the box. So
except for that namespace. That namespace is privileged.
Yeah, but that's not the default, right? So the default security context constraint is literally called default, and that's the most cut down permission template that we have. And on the other hand, OpenShift customers are getting burned by that a lot because they can't just use their funky Upstream stuff, because none of that works with that.
No, I totally get that. For your own projects and namespaces, totally agree. I'm just saying the OpenShift operator's namespace is not that way. It's a special one. It does not use the restricted policy. It's overridden. And so that's where
the namespace is overridden. Like, isn't this done at the deployment level for each operator?
The problem is that it's done through RBAC. The mapping is done through RBAC, and so all of the security, all of the service accounts can be evaluated for any SCC, which includes privileged. SCCs are funky the way that they're built and how they're evaluated and applied. And so effectively, the OpenShift operator's namespace has cluster admin authority.
I'll have to take a look at that. I don't know when we've applied a different SEC than the default to that in our configurations that ship with OpenShift.
Yeah, if you look at the cluster role bindings for I can't remember which one it is. I think it might be, there's a cluster role binding that's mapping all service accounts. It's basically splat, 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 right? It's a role binding for that maps, I can't remember what it maps to, but it maps to something that allows you to basically use all, right? So it allows you to use any SEC. So all SECs are evaluated for any pod that runs in that namespace. So maybe it's just something I need to, I mean, it's really, really hard to fix because once you've, let Pandora out, it's kind of hard to put it back, right? Other than using a different namespace. So let me, as I expected, this is a can of worms. So I guess, Daniel, how do you want me to proceed? I mean, I think we've got lots of different things to think about. The descoped operator thing, of course, is going to have a huge impact all over the place. And I think this needs to be included in that discussion, in that design when that happens, definitely from the UI perspective, right? And then between now and then, I think, I guess, was it you, Nick, that was talking about needing to do some more research? Maybe you want to brush up on how SECs and PSPs work?
Yeah. I don't typically interact with them, so.
And then what, do we want to revisit this again in a couple of weeks, or?
I think, Chris, it makes sense to, I don't know if maybe somebody else on the call knows, but there are two ways I think we can proceed here for the RFE path. So one is obviously the OpenShift console is an upstream project, right? So you can create a GitHub issue against that with an RFE, and that would get processed. We also do have a public OpenShift Jira project called RFE, and that's where I'm blank if that's actually public. So you could post to it, or if we are putting some tape around that, I don't know. But either of those things should get the request for special treatment in front of the right people. And then it also they also loop us in because we closely collaborate on how do we surface certain OLM functionality in the UI and how certain UI flows are supposed to work. The OLM UI is certainly one of the more sophisticated portions of the console because of the restrictions that we have right in the flow that we are looking at. So I think it would be an enhancement to that process. And from there, we would kind of have a written statement of, where you are having a problem today, what use case you're trying to solve, what the solution would ideally look like, and then we can iterate from there. I think there's some stuff we need to kind of look at.
All right, so you want to work downstream upwards, and then if we can see opportunities to enhance OLM, then we'll take it from that perspective rather than going from OLM downward or downwards.
I mean, it's all upstream in any case, right? So, there's no OLM gap here that I can tell.
Well, other than you can't express pod security policies.
Well, that's because I don't know if we actually support this on OpenShift, right?
I mean, well, it'd be security context constraints.
Right. So yeah, we are not allowing to ship them today. We could allow them. But it's, that's a separate discussion we need to have on the OLM side, because, that gets really into the way of security relevant topics that we don't normally tell users, right? So, at most you could have a cluster role and a cluster role binding being shipped with your operator that's fairly broad, and we would show that to you and people understand what that means. If you ship a security context constraints that suddenly allows you to mingle with kernel tunables in your hosts, that's a different deal, right? And that's something that we would need to really take a look at. especially in the downstream version of OLM, or like our certified operators, looking at that, not shipping, very privileged SCCs or forcing the use of the default SCC. So long story short, let's work on the console aspect to see what we can do there. And then let's also work in parallel on the OLM aspect of what's the use case for supporting custom SCCs, and is that something we should do? Should we treat those differently so that, for instance, the install plan always has to be manually approved? I think we want to have more discussion in a group around that.
Okay.
Does it make sense? I mean,
it does. It's complicated, and I knew it would be, right? I want to have the discussion, and so yeah, I'll compose my thoughts, and I will attack it from the RFE perspective on the OpenShift side.
Yeah, and like I don't want to just make this about OpenShift because like the security concerns are kind of generally applicable, right? So like from a technical perspective, it would probably be super straightforward to just add that one segment in the giant switch statement that we have and allow SCCs and PSBs to be onboarded and applied. But we have consciously not done that in the past because, I don't want to step on people's foot here, but we don't want to be another tiller, right, on a cluster that just, blindly applies whatever you throw at it. So we take real good thoughts around and concerns around, what we are processing in which way so that we don't expose operator consumers to risky or like security risks and risky cluster configurations. And I think, this is necessary due diligence we want to have all the time. So I don't think it's a super big technical problem. It's just always that OLM runs as cluster admin or with cluster admin privileges. So It's fairly powerful, and we want to be really responsible with that power.
No, I get that. I mean, we've already got this with webhooks too, right? So we're already creating, webhooks on the fly, and those things are super all powerful as well, right? If you're not careful. Yeah. So it seems like once we get into this descoped concept, separating, further separating the the personas, right? You are a cluster admin, and by the way, this is the thing that this is going to do to your cluster. Be very transparent about what's happening. Yes, the OLM is running as cluster admin, but I guarantee that this is the stuff that we're going to be deploying as an extension to your control plane.
Yeah.
Right. So SCC to me means it's one of those things that gives you transparency.
So yeah. Just to level here, I want to be sure we're fair to everyone on the call. Chris, do you feel like you have a good sense of follow-up for this? I think
I'm good. Really I'm good. Yep.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. I just wanted to ask one last thing of Chris before he went on, and I'm sorry. I know we've piled a lot onto you. I skimmed through the issue a little bit more. I didn't see kind of an output of the scenario that you're describing where you're losing clients or customers. Would it be possible for you to just like write the small blurb there with maybe some kubectl output from like, these are the SCCs that I'm seeing, and this is how it's getting binded to the OpenShift operator's namespace and the stuff there? Like, I don't expect a description of how SCCs work, just like the particular resources that you see that are problematic.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'll put it in this one or if I'll put it in, I think I might need to put it in the downstream one, only because I don't want to pollute the upstream with OpenShift stuff necessarily.
Sure. We could also talk about it in the Slack channel.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
I'll think about it. I know exactly what you're looking for. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Next up on the list of issues to address is 1957, which is per CRD, RBAC resource is not created. I see Lucas is on the call. This is something that we discussed internally a little bit. Lucas, do you want to go ahead and talk about this issue a little bit?
Hey everyone. So just a little bit of context here.
Lux, could you up your volume a little bit? It's really hard to hear.
Oh, is this better?
Yeah, that's a lot better. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So just to add a little bit of context here, I'm not sure to what degree this has been discussed before, but we're trying to release an operator for Nexus, right? It's our 5th release, and we've been able to use the same package manifest to release for OpenShift, but the tests failed for this one, right? For Operator Hub. The problem, what seems to be the issue here is that the RBAC resources are not created appropriately, right? So the CRD gets installed, the service account is also present, but the problem is that there's no cluster role or cluster role binding that satisfies the policies present in the CSV, right? My understanding is that these resources should be automatically created by OLM, right? Because this is the way it has been on the previous releases as well. I'm not entirely sure what exactly is happening. Why are they not being created? But further down, I believe we've managed to isolate which part of code is relevant here, or at least which one is showing the errors that we're seeing, which are when we're trying to lift or upgrade the existing roles and role bindings to cluster roles and cluster role bindings. The problem is that these roles and role bindings, the namespaced ones, also don't exist. So I'm not sure if it should be trying to upgrade these or if another path of code should have been followed somewhere. But the symptoms are basically these. The CRD is present, the SA is present, but there's never any role satisfying the policies that are specified on the CSV.
Yeah, and just to be clear, like when you reproduce this issue, you reproduce it every time and you reproduce it on a fresh install of the operator, not on an upgrade, right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay.
I haven't tested an upgrade. It might behave differently, but yeah, on all occasions that I tested, you tried kind, I also tried Minikube. It doesn't seem to be a cluster-specific thing. But what bothers me is that the same package manifest worked fine for OCP, for OpenShift. So there might be something there.
Wait, so just to be clear, you're saying it works on OpenShift but not on vanilla kube?
Right. So I haven't manually tested on OpenShift, but it does pass the test suite that is provided by the community operators repository. It's basically the same thing as their CI. It basically tests deploying the operator and checks if everything's fine. And it works on OpenShift, but doesn't work for the operator hub suite of tests. I'm not sure if those tests run the same things, by the way. So maybe they are testing for different stuff. I'm not sure.
Did you look at the status of the install plan that generated this?
If I had a look at what, I'm sorry?
The status of the install plan.
Of the install plan, no, I only checked the status of the CSV, the subscription.
Yeah. So it could be, there could be a situation where the install plan choked on some resource and didn't continue applying the RBAC and maybe potentially other resources. Also, there is version skew between Upstream and the version in OpenShift. So there could be a bug with RBAC hoisting, like you're talking about. I remember briefly looking over the code, and there may be something in that area, but I haven't done a really hard check of that.
Yeah, I also tried doing some testing yesterday. I manually provided a cluster role and a cluster role binding as part of the manifests that are being installed, but it didn't quite work. The cluster role gets applied, but the cluster role binding doesn't. I'm assuming it's because it's invalid, since I don't. Inside the cluster role binding, I need to reference the service account, right, which is a namespace resource. So I can't really produce a valid cluster role binding because I don't know which namespace is it going to be installed beforehand, right? We only have that information when the subscription is created. So I tried inserting like placeholder as the namespace, which is the same that is done on the CSV, but that didn't work. I was just messing around, maybe trying to figure out something, but yeah, it didn't really render any successful results.
Yeah, this was a single namespace mode. It looks like a single namespace target.
Yeah,
default.
I tried all namespaces using the global operator, the default one, right? And I also tried using a specific operator group of a single target namespace, and it also didn't work.
Failed in both cases. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I think one of the most important things is going to be take a look at the install plan status and make sure that all of the resources were applied correctly from that. Yeah.
Right, so what should I expect to see here in the install plan?
You should expect to see a status that lists a set of resources, and all of those resources reference like config maps where they're living, but it'll tell you the, I believe, the GBK and everything of each one of those, and it'll have a status, a substatus on each one of those that says like whether it's applied or it's failed to apply or whatever, or hasn't been applied yet. And so for the RBAC and other, you may see that they haven't been applied, or if the problem is in the application of the install plan itself.
Yeah, okay, I'll have a look at that and then update the issue with whatever I find.
Thank you.
Do you guys have any other pointers which I could try testing as well if this is if the stuff in install plan looks correct?
I think that's honestly the most the quickest way to figure it out. And if it's not that, then it's there's probably an issue somewhere else.
Okay. Well, all right then. I guess that's enough to try to move forward here. I appreciate the guidance. This has been, I mean, I've sure learned a lot, but it's been something difficult to deal with, especially considering that we have been, our release has been stuck for like a month. So it's been a little stressful as well. I appreciate the help.
Yeah, I think this highlights another issue, which is that it's hard for users to debug when things like this go wrong, which is also, I think, something that we would ideally like to solve, is like grapple with the complexity and enable users to see more clearly what the issue. I think there's a lot of this, especially around like install plans and like where it's like something went wrong, but you have to check the status of a certain resource a certain way to know, which forces you to know the APIs, but you're not really interested in learning the APIs. You just need to, publish your operator. So that's something that I think we also want to do somehow. So yeah. Okay. So Lucas, it seems like you have a clear follow-up there.
Yep.
And I think you're in the R Slack, but then there's also the Upstream, the Kube Slack, if you want to leave feedback there. We can keep looking at it. So we have about 10 minutes left or so. Are there any other issues that anyone on the call would like to bring up? I don't see any others on the agenda. Okay. I feel like in that case, we may just call this one early and give everyone a few minutes back instead of just going down a list and debugging issues. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. I think this was a productive session, and definitely if anyone has any GitHub issues that they would like to discuss, this Thursday morning meeting is a good place to discuss them and make progress on them, because we definitely want to look at and try to get to everyone, help everyone as best we can. So with that, I'll give everyone some time back, and enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you in the working group next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ben. Bye.